The first migration movement was a time of widespread migrations within or into Europe about 1000 BC to the middle of the millennium AD. The first description of the migration movement. About 1000 BC, the Ionians settled at the eastern part of the Aegean and on the Anatolian coast, and about 800 to 600 BC. They went from Italy, Sicily, and to the territory up to the Black Sea coast. The first wave of people came from the 8th to the halfway 7th century BC, and the second from the 6th to the 5th century BC. When the Greek polis system appeared, there were two waves of colonization. The Greek polis was a source of migration both for economic and political reasons. Most immigrants left the Greek area and only slaves entered. Greek colonization. The Greek area was quicker to develop than the rest of Europe, and that's why a lot of migrations took place to and from Greek cities. The migration period was a time of widespread migrations within or into Europe in the middle of the millennium AD. Many of these migrations were movements of Germanic, Slavic and other people into the territory of the then Roman Empire, with or without accompanying invasions or war. The first migrations were made by Germanic tribes. The barbarian invasions may be divided into two phases. The first phase happened between 300 and 500 AD. The second phase happened between 500 and 700 AD.
For several centuries, Europe was a larger contributor to intercontinental migration. More than 65 million Europeans left the continent, whereas migration from other continents to Europe was extremely limited. From 1500 to 1800, lots of Africans immigrated to Europe as slaves. Once the Reconquista was over, hundreds of thousands were brought to Portugal, Spain, Sicily and northern Italy, where they worked as domestic slaves or craftsmen in agriculture. Other African slaves were forced to cultivate sugarcane in southern Spain and Portugal. A few Africans arrived in Europe via the New World. These migrants were usually accompanying their masters and kept their slave status while in Europe.
The First World War was the reason for the first refugee movement in the 20th century. Refugees from Belgium found shelter in France, the Netherlands and the UK. A lot of Serbian refugees made their way to Albania, some of them to Corfu, Corsica or Tunisia. After the First World War, Armenian refugees scattered across the Middle East and Russia. The Second World War caused the second big refugee movement in the 20th century. There were huge migratory movements in Europe after the war. Most of them were sent back to their countries of origin. Many surviving Jews left Europe altogether and resettled in Israel or the United States. After the outbreak of the revolution in Hungary, Hungarian refugees came back to Austria. After the Prague Spring, a lot of refugees escaped to the United States, Austria and Switzerland.
In the following 2 minutes, I am going to describe you the current situation in the 5 participating countries: Italy, Turkey, Greece, Spain and Austria. Since the early 2000s, the small island of Lampedusa has become a transit point for immigrants and asylum seekers wanting to enter Europe. There doesn't exist an official number of refugees living in Italy. Turkey currently hosts more than 250,000 refugees who are housed in 26 camps. But nearly 200 million refugees in Turkey live outside the camps and often struggle to find housing while they live in poverty. In July 2015, Greece became the temporary home of more than 50,000 refugees, where islands like Lesbos, Kos, Samos count to the main destinations of immigrants and refugees. Spain doesn't take in many refugees. The government just agreed to take in 15,000 refugees from overwhelmed Greece and Italy, but until now they didn't keep their promise. Austria is for refugees one of the favorite countries to stay in. That's the reason why nearly 90,000 people wanted asylum in Austria in 2015. This was the third highest quote in Europe.
Hi, I am Alanut Al-Juma. I am 16 years old. I am from Syria. I was here for 5 months ago. I'm here because there's war in Syria and I can't study there. And I love this school very much.